Hello again. Welcome to another edition of Arts and Ideas. I'm Sue Swinand. We have a marvelous show for you today. My guest is Leslie Schomp. We're up at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester. Easy to get to, right off of exit 11 on 290. Just come right through the main gate, up the hill to the big red building with the clock tower. The shows they do in this gallery, the Cantor Gallery, are exceptionally high quality. They are curated by Roger Hankins, who does a marvelous job. They're very much worth your time. The show that's here right now is called Viewpoints, and it's the faculty show. And included in the show is my guest, Leslie Schomp, and I'm so happy to have you. You're really, I'm so looking forward to looking at your work.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And this show runs till December 8th,
December
so people
8th.
have a chance to come in and see it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, Leslie is a faculty member here, obviously, and what is it you teach?
I teach drawing and have for about 10 or 11 years now.
At Holy Cross?
At Holy Cross, amongst other places, but I have been here for
I didn't
consistently.
realize you were here that long.
Yep.
Wow.
And I'll teach at other places too. It's the life of a lecturer.
You can see Leslie's work, by the way, on the Holy Cross website. She's got quite a few images up. Her work is so amazing. I can't, it's very difficult to describe, but we're going to spend some time looking at it. But first I'd like to find out more about you. I know you were a finalist in the Mass Cultural Council Fellowships, and I can see why, very deserving work. The cool thing is her work is drawing, but it's drawing in 3 dimensions.
Yes.
And
Yes.
do you bring that kind of concept to your drawing that you teach at Holy Cross?
I do in some ways, yeah. I mean, one of the things I think about teaching is that you have to kind of, you know, teach your lesson and teach your whatever, you know, concept you're developing, but also really be on the lookout for what it is they do, and if somebody has a tendency towards sculpture or other materials, I really enjoy looking hard for that and trying to draw that out of them. So I do. I have taught sculpture. I have made sculpture, and I'm very interested in the idea that a drawing can be two-sided or be an object in itself. That's a big theme in my work.
I would consider your work sculpture or installation.
Absolutely,
it's really occupying space and 3-dimensional drawing, which again seems a little bit like a contradiction, but it isn't.
Right.
So you went to Mass College of Art?
I went to Mass College of Art for graduate school, Florida State for undergrad, and I have lived in Boston and Massachusetts for about, I don't know, 11 years.
What brought you back from Florida up to Massachusetts?
I was raised, first of all, I was born in Florida. I am Floridian. At the age of 3, I come from a large family of 8 children, and my parents really wanted to raise us in Ireland for none other than that they thought it would be a great place to raise their kids. So we went there, and my father found work as both a lecturer in the University of Limerick. It was NIHE at the time, and he was a writer as well. We went from living in Dublin to Limerick to very rural Ireland. So I was there for 11 years. Yeah, and then we moved back to Florida. He had a hankering to come back, and
so basically your whole childhood was spent in Ireland.
Yeah, but I have a longing for Ireland. I think my aesthetic is really placed there. I think the color choices I make is very much about what I saw as a child. And
your work is so much about the fabric and the weaving and the embroidery and the linen and is that, do you think, the Irish crafts of the laces and linens of Ireland?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the big, and being in an all-girls school, in a convent school, I mean, a big part of the curriculum then, and I'm sure still now, is the home economics. I mean, it's a class. You take it. It's very serious. You cook from scratch. You make a skirt. You make a quilt. You knit a sweater. And I was just one of those people who responded to that. I really enjoyed that. I went home and did more of it. I still remember making very religious-themed needle pictures or embroidered pictures where you would embroider a cross with an Easter message, and you give it as a gift to your mother. And I realized recently, wow, I was doing that. It's just now the theme has changed, but it's still very much the same thing. I knew back then I could express myself with the embroidered medium. And I think women have been subtly doing that through history, sort of pushing their...
Do you feel connected to women's issues, or is that a part of women's work? Does that play into your feeling about your mode of expression?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of women who are working with fiber right now, the history of domestic craft, it weighs heavily on what they're doing, and a lot of it has a lovely tension with the medium and the history of the medium that, you know, there's this kind of delicacy. You know, the women's craft in history has gone back and forth between controlling women, getting them to sit in a space and be quiet, but also be productive, keep them busy. It was actually, for a while though, then seen as a health problem because women weren't moving around and they weren't strong for childbirth and other things they needed to do as women. But on the other hand, I think women really also express themselves. So I think it's not very clear cut. I think it's, you know, and I look back at some of that needlework and it expresses me. You know, I feel a great sense of empathy for some of those things. I look at diary entries or, you know, little tea towels that say things, and I absolutely think they're saying things that I still can relate to.
You've brought that into the mainstream of contemporary art, which
so
is a merging of the women's work in the past into the contemporary art world.
Yes, and there's a lot of really great people.
Let's show our audience. This piece is, at least you can see the scale of it. You're going to have a hard time seeing the actual drawing. And of course the drawing is done with needles embroidering these little teeny tiny portraits. Tell us more about this.
Okay, well, I think two things came about with these. One is that I go to the Antiquarian Society, the American Antiquarian Society in Worcester on Salisbury Street occasionally to look at things such as miniatures, miniatures, and silhouettes, valentines, diaries. But I did go on occasion to see some miniatures, and one of the great things about it is they bring you a box and you carefully handle them.
Things.
Right, you don't just look at them in a case, but you can actually hold them. And if you turn them around, they might have a beautiful piece of hair work in the back. These are made with hair. And what the Victorian era...
Is it your hair?
This is my hair. So the second thing is I spend a lot of time in art stores with my son, looking at you know, craft items, and I saw these little frames, and I just kind of fell in love with them. This particular brand.
These are actually the scale of dollhouse frames.
And they are dollhouse frames. You buy them for your dollhouse. I mean, I literally. But I especially love these little oval ones, and I thought, you know, I wonder if I can draw this small. I don't know if I can. And one of the things that's really important to me in the studio with drawing is that I learn more about it as an artist as I move through my practice. So let's see if I can. It's really hard to draw this small, and so I'm learning a lot about how to hold back, how to, you know, more information, less information, what's important. I have a tiny sketchbook that's also a dollhouse book where I practice and play around with imagery at the same time that I do this. So these are done with my hair. I try to keep all the images thumb size or smaller as a reference to me. The hair is a reference to me. It's also a value. I had started working with this brown plasticized thread, and I realized my hair was one shade off, and I was like, really want that value. And that's how the hair started, but it's become a genetic type.
I like that. I like that. I think it makes it really unique, and these little things really force you to think about drawing in a totally new way. Let's look at the book. This little book is fabulous. What's the title of this piece?
This book is titled Diary. It's sort of a reference. I had spent some time looking at diaries at the Antiquarian Society again, and I was really intrigued by the notion that we're always either formally scribbling down our thoughts, and I think we're very honest in our diaries to the point of bordering on probably telling too much information.
Well, it's kind of soul-searching.
Yeah, absolutely, and you're willing to write down anything and not worry about how it's
questioning big issues and so forth. Hold it up a little bit.
Yeah, and now I've never really kept a formal diary, but I'm constantly writing little things here and there, and I was thinking about what is the gist, or how does this all translate down? And for me, it has a lot to do with trying to be content, trying to to refocus, and I think it's really hard to, but what this says is, how do I absorb all this beauty? And we talked a little bit about this word beauty and what does that mean?
I was really struck when I saw the word beauty as the
Dangerous.
focus of this diary book. How do I absorb all this beauty? And that is embroidered into the pages of the book. And as you can see, all the blue lines on the book are stitched so that they're physical. They're not just an illusion of a line or a dry mark, or they are actual strings embroidering those very familiar blue lines on the notebook. And then those strings, thousands of them, fall to the ground. And as does the embroidery where it says, how do I absorb all this beauty? So I was kind of wondering about her. How does she dare speak about beauty in this time? But anyway, you're
right. Well, I mean, you know, that word has so many meanings, and it has so many meanings for each one of us. It's not as if we all have one definition. And when I say the word beauty in reference to how do I look today, there's this kind of dangerous idea of the levels of attraction and how society plays into that and how we even play into that. But what I mean here is
how they set up our expectations
and
determine
can be
what
damaging.
is beautiful.
Absolutely, and that's a very loaded, I don't dare to go there. But beauty here, the other beauty I have is nature, and this idea of how do I see myself as part of nature and not as apart from it, and the levels of you know, contentment, and just they're really,
so
sometimes I'm just
would be identifying with the order and harmony and diversity and complexity and subtlety of nature.
Honestly, it's
and
so
identifying
absolutely, and just saying, you know, there really is so much beauty in this world. Wouldn't it be great to be able to sort of know that all the time? And I actually think it's almost impossible. So it's a question, but I don't have a question mark. I don't know that anyone can help me out with that.
That kind of reminds me of the Paper Garden book, which was the biography of Mary Delaney, and you had recommended that to me. But one of the things about it was that sense of being able to focus on something in the world, and focus on it with a love and attention and awareness, and that kind of is what you're saying.
Yes.
That people who really observe and who study or who collect things or who draw from nature, they're really identifying with that. And I almost feel like it's a way of prayer, because you're worshiping, you're acknowledging the wonder of it.
Right.
Or,
We talked about the transcendentalists as well.
Yes. That reminds me of a saying too that Joseph Campbell used to say to see the radiance in each thing, whether it's some lowly stone
and
or
it's
whatever.
an intense physical response when you do stop for a minute and just see something out there other than yourself that is just a glorious color, or you know, a glorious. I mean, I'm an amateur gardener, and I'm just overwhelmed by it, really, and it's very emotional for me to.
It's amazing what you can notice in watching the grass grow.
Right. Well, and I think diaries too. They're often about there's a little self-pity in them. That's the place where you can express that, and so there's also. I wish I could just get over this, you know, and a little bit about this, sort of, so how do I sum it up? I'm also very drawn to the aesthetic. I think blue lines on notebook pages are fantastic.
When she says the aesthetic, your work is really all about the material. Like feeling the linen, feeling the cotton, feeling the roughness of the surface or the holes in the fabric. It's so physical.
Yeah, and you know, what would it be like to take the image of a book and make it a little bit more of an experience? So sort of casting it out as a landscape, giving it a path. You know, I honestly, I make work just to see what it's going to look like.
So you really are using these flowing threads that go down like a river.
Yeah,
They're like a
path. They're some
or
way
a pathway,
or pulling you into the book, giving you a distance to see.
And it also flows into time. The tail that runs down onto the floor. Great. Let's look at some other ones.
Yep.
I'd like to show the audience some of your other work that's not included in this installation in the Cantor Gallery. this piece is called Double Self-Portrait, and I notice you do a lot of portrait work.
I do, and mostly myself. I mean, it's funny, I do it for a lot of different reasons. One is that I've been making self-portraits since I was young, and at this point, my age, it's really interesting for me to look back and say, wow, I've been doing this for a long time. I think it took a really long time for me to sort of settle on that exclusively. People used to say, you know, it's okay to make self-portraits, and I would make them, but I'd make all this other stuff. And I've sort of settled into, I'm enough to handle right now. I mean, I think it's really hard to see oneself clearly.
Well, to do a good self-portrait, it's a very expressive thing, too. These almost remind me of like Oskar Kokoschka paintings or something with that jittery line.
Yes.
And the way you get so much expression into the line itself, it kind of vibrates and has a very expressive quality. In this one, the audience can really see the way the threads of the embroidery, which is the drawing, first of all, they're in a three-dimensional framed hoop, but they come into space,
right,
and they connect to
another portrait of myself. And I actually move. I mean, I set up this hoop, this double hoop, and I set up two mirrors, and I actually moved to each side of the table, and every time I brought the thread over to they're made simultaneously. And again, I would move over to the other mirror and see the light that way, and sew for a while, bring it back over and knot it when it ended. And so it was really about recording as much as I could my process of drawing, seeing what kind of decisions I made and seeing what that looked like spatially. So it's about sort of deconstructing the drawing process, my personal one, and seeing how do I move from one thing to the other. And on the back, of course, an alternative portrait becomes made, which I'm just as interested in.
Let's show the wedding dress, because I think that one they will really get the idea of what you're talking about. This idea of having the drawing be a two-sided drawing.
Or at least a two-sided.
There's an image here and an image there, and the threads are actually moving through. It's fabulous. Okay.
So this one is slightly different because I took an object, and the object is a dress, and wanted to play with the portrait of my son, my husband, myself, kind of trying to sort of explore the idea of boundaries in a close relationship between a child and a mother and a woman and a man, and how those boundaries can be fluid, and that can be disconcerting at times. And where do I end again? What is my space? Who am I? What makes me me? Those early years when you have a child and you hear a child cry and you immediately respond, and there's this kind of strain.
Do I have a life?
Well, where am I? So it's about really struggling for that. And there's this thin layer of a dress that kind of separates you, or my attempt to separate myself just for a moment in this piece.
It also, because it is like a wedding dress, it also has the feeling for me, like not knowing that
it's a marriage dress.
That you give yourself. You are within that package. It's kind of
still in here. Yeah, it's where is my skin? What is my boundary? So that's very thin.
And now let's see the back of the dress, because this is and actually that's the front of the dress.
This is the front, back,
and that is your husband.
The husband's head, my child's arm.
And if you look closely, you can see the way the hair is worked around the applique on the dress, which is wonderful. And then the arm of your child coming around your leg, which was just the height he might be.
Right, the height. I try to be literal about it. I try to sort of think about scale, and again, just right where he was grabbing your knees and you trip a little bit. Yes. So, that whole age group.
So it's a triple self-portrait.
It is.
And of course it's a sculpture too, because it exists in 3 dimensions. Let's show one of the other double portraits, the one with the flowers.
The flowers. I started working, being, again, an amateur gardener, I started loving the idea that if I was using my hair organically, there's more organic stuff to use out there. And again, very inspired by something I saw in a historical society, these pressed flower specimens and the idea of making marks with organic material.
Also those wonderful flower embroideries they do with hair.
Oh, amazing, yeah.
They're really gorgeous.
Absolutely. I mean, I look as much as historical stuff as I do contemporary art. The two are sort of, I look at all.
At the Ward House in Shrewsbury, they have a few of those framed. I don't know if you've ever been there. But they're very elaborate, all different kinds of flowers done as mementos of different women, and their hair color is used.
Yes.
Do you use different hair from different people or just your family?
And I have another portrait here of self-portrait with son, and mine is done with my hair and his is done with my husband's, mine, his, so that they're genetically signed as essential.
So this is the plant matter and thread.
And my hair.
And then let's
only my hair and plant matter.
And then the other side of that drawing is very different, and yet the idea that you can see both sides of the drawing at once.
If you walk around it. So that somebody might have to walk around your drawing is of interest to me.
And again, that it occupies space. And now, is it laminated?
No.
Are there 2 layers of cloth?
There's only 1 layer of cloth there. So that you can still see all of the sewing has reached to the other side, and yet here I've included this kind of weed and roots.
It gives that strange translucency, like encaustic is so popular now, but it almost feels like encaustic because you see the line in a light layer, you might say.
And you know, this whole idea of the two-sided image came from me being very inspired by Frida Kahlo's journals. Her paper was so thin that the writing seeped to her other writing, and she started actually using it as an image. It starts off where it just kind of happens. I'll never know to be able to ask her, but for me, she responded to it.
I think Nolja painted on very thin paper that both sides were used as saturated color.
And my students and I talk about that possibility. I show them, you know, where accidents can happen.
How about this self-portrait of yourself and your son?
And this is where, again, his is made with 3 different, you know, hair, and my husband's, my son's, and mine is just made with mine.
You know, again, it has this feeling of the wedding veil or the First Communion veil or many of those things.
The way they hang out the back. And
So let's look at some of the lacy pieces. Oh, that's the sonogram. Oh, okay. And this?
This is a sonogram. Again, I'm interested in love tokens and things that describe your life, and this is me taking my son's sonogram and trying to replicate it by pulling threads out. It's very abstract. Pulling threads out of the fabric to make a mark and sort of going back into the fabric as opposed to on top.
Show the house, because that really gives the idea of the pulling the threads out. Okay. So the big house was in the Worcester Stage Show, right?
That one was not. This was in another show, the Grimshaw. This is, again, very inspired by images of just a body or a house it's your body. Again, that boundary, where am I and where do I end and what's my space?
An enclosure.
An enclosure.
Yes.
You know, you think about Louise Bourgeois' Femme Maison. I looked at medieval drawings by nuns who were drawing themselves in these small cell-like structures waiting for their bridegroom Christ. A lot of children's illustrations, the house that Jack built, the 3 little pigs, these very small houses that just really occupy you and what's necessary. And so embroidered these in this.
It's a place to be.
It's a place to be. Again, also looking at Leonardo's or Michelangelo's drawings of the internal body and the segmentation of your organs inside. So very much like a structure. And inside are embroidered all of these objects that feel personal and anonymous.
And if you look inside this house when you come to the gallery, you can see all kinds of little embroideries of
objects. There's a chair, there's a book, there's a hole, there's a picture frame, a mirror, there's a plant, shovel.
Objects that would be in a house
that are necessary,
useful to you.
Useful, sentimental, but also very anonymous, because we all have that version. We all have our frame.
And on the front door of the house, where it's kind of sheltered, but you're actually cutting away threads and tying the vertical woven.
I'm actually pulling out most of the horizontal so that what's left are the vertical. I'm unweaving it to say, which is very obsessive. I'm drawn more to obsessive things to do in my
and
work.
And you work at home, don't you?
I do work at home. I haven't had a studio for a while. I was with my small child. I can sit, pull out threads while he's playing. You know, I think the whole furniture aspect of the work is creeping in because I'm around my belongings. I don't think it's accidental. I love that Louise Bourgeois in her early career was working in her building, and a lot of her sculptures existed in her home. And she was sort of living with them for a while, and I thought, well, we'll do this for now. You know, the dining room is a great place to work because who uses their dining room? Very rarely.
I find if I draw without thinking, like
Right.
when I'm doing other things, it's like Mozart used to say,
Yes.
he would have his wife tell him a story while he was composing, so
yeah.
he didn't think about it too much.
Oh yeah, I watch movies on a loop that I've seen before, so I can kind of listen to them.
Yeah.
You know, good old.
Okay, well let's look at some of the little handkerchiefs.
Sure.
These are all vintage fabrics, and of course your selection of these pieces is so fitting.
Yeah.
The cut work in what's the name of this one?
This one's called Self-portrait with Lungs. Again, looking at myself as someone who breathes and interacts with the environment on a level of taking in of oxygen and getting out of carbon dioxide.
There's such a delicacy about these antique fabrics.
Yes.
Such an elegant delicacy. I mean, can you imagine blowing your nose?
Exactly. Well, that's the thing. They're alternately beautiful objects of commemoration. They really are, and yet you do blow your nose with them. They have bodily contact.
And of course, that was a big. I remember my mother crocheting handkerchiefs.
Yes.
But what interests me too is the way the little cut work in the corners,
Right.
the way you've incorporated that into this very decorative and connecting lung tissue, which
Right.
is so
Porous and
exactly,
open.
so strong.
Again, letting yourself be inspired by what was there and allowing that to teach you something about a way of making mark. And you know, there's so many great women right now working with handkerchiefs. It's becoming a really great phenomenon
Yours
at the
is
moment.
very different, though. Yours is very different. So there's so many wonderful things to see. Look for Leslie's work on the website of Holy Cross. I think there are at least a couple dozen images
There's
there.
a few, yeah.
And come to the gallery at Holy Cross, the Cantor Gallery, right at the top of the hill, the red building. And this faculty show is up until December 8th.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm afraid that's all we have time for.
Well, thanks for having me.
But
It's been great talking to you. You're
learning
wonderful.
about your work and seeing it, and I hope you'll come back and join us again next time for another edition of Arts and Ideas.